You don't become a low-value man overnight. It's not one mistake that breaks you. It's a series of small ones. Moments where you let your discipline slide, your focus fade, your purpose drift. Moments where you told yourself it's not that serious until suddenly everything is. Low value isn't about status or looks. It's about how much of yourself you've lost to comfort, weakness, and excuses. You can't hide from it. Your habits will always expose you. Here are 7 signs you're becoming a low-value man, or already are, and how to stop the downward spiral before it ruins everything you could have been. Make sure you watch till the end because the last one is the reason most men never level up. Let's begin. 1. You lack self-control. Every downfall begins with this one. You want success, but you can't control your urges. You talk about focus, but you give your energy to distractions that drain you. You talk about purpose, but you spend hours chasing pleasure. You tell yourself you're in control, but deep down, you know you're not. You're addicted to short-term highs that steal your long-term peace. And it always starts small. Just one more scroll, just one more drink, just one more night out, until those small choices become a lifestyle. And that lifestyle becomes your prison. Every time you choose pleasure over discipline, you train your mind to obey weakness. You become a slave to impulse. And you can't build a kingdom if you're serving your own addictions. The truth is, most men don't lose because life is unfair. They lose because they can't master themselves. A high-value man does the opposite. He controls what he eats, what he watches, who he entertains, and how he reacts, not because he's boring, but because he values peace more than pleasure. He knows that every no he says to temptation is a yes to his power. So ask yourself, are you controlling your habits, or are your habits controlling you? Because the man who can't control himself will eventually be controlled by everything around him. But here's where most men make it worse. Instead of fixing themselves, they convince themselves they already know what they're doing. 2. You think you know everything. This is the silent killer of progress. A man who believes he's already wise stops learning. He mistakes experience for mastery and ego for confidence. Low-value men think they know it all. They speak loud, argue endlessly, and resist advice, not because they're strong, but because they're insecure. They'd rather look right than actually be right. You can spot them easily. They interrupt everyone but rarely listen. They defend their mistakes instead of learning from them. They see correction as an insult, not a gift. The sad truth, a man who refuses to listen will eventually have nothing left worth saying. A high-value man stays curious. He questions himself. He studies people who've already done what he's trying to do. He learns quietly and applies relentlessly. Pride feels powerful. But pride is just the armor men wear to protect their ego from truth. The difference between a weak man and a strong man is that the weak man hides behind his opinions while the strong man searches for understanding. So when someone gives you advice, do you defend yourself or do you listen? When someone challenges your mindset, do you shut down or do you grow? Because the man who stops learning has already stopped leading. And that's why the next sign matters even more. When you stop learning, you start chasing the wrong things to fill that emptiness. 3. You chase pleasure over discipline. This is the one that ruins good men silently because pleasure feels right in the moment, but it leaves you empty the second it's over. You tell yourself you're living life, but you're really escaping it. You're drinking to forget, smoking to feel calm, chasing women to feel wanted, scrolling to feel distracted. Every one of those actions feels harmless until you realize years have passed and nothing's changed. Pleasure is easy. Discipline is hard. But the difference is this: pleasure keeps you the same. Discipline changes everything. Low-value men live for the weekend. They talk about their dreams but spend their energy on dopamine hits, entertainment, hookups, laziness. They crave the feeling of progress instead of doing the work that creates it. High-value men understand that comfort is a trap. They don't chase peace through pleasure. They earn peace through structure. They don't run from hard things. They run toward them because they know growth hides in discomfort. Every man must choose his struggle. Suffer from discipline now or suffer from regret later. And that's why the next point is even more dangerous. Because when pleasure becomes your habit, complaining becomes your language. 4. You complain too much and avoid responsibility. Nothing drains a man's power faster than constant complaining. Low-value men love to talk about what's wrong, but never about what they're doing to fix it. They blame the world, the government, their past, their parents, everything except themselves. Here's the harsh truth. Every time you complain, you're telling the world that life owns you. You're admitting that you've given up control. Strong men don't do that. They don't waste time explaining why things are unfair. They use that energy to get stronger. When something goes wrong, they don't point fingers. They ask, what can I do about it? Complaining might make you feel heard, but it never changes your situation. Low-value men stay stuck because they never realize this simple truth. As long as you see yourself as a victim, you'll live like one. Every time you take responsibility, even for things you didn't cause, you gain power, because now you have something you can change. The difference between weak men and strong men isn't luck. It's ownership. The weak complain, the strong correct. But here's where most men fail. Instead of fixing themselves, they turn their frustration outward, criticizing everyone else to hide the fact that they're not improving. 5. You constantly criticize others. A man who spends his time judging others is a man who's avoiding looking at himself. Low-value men live through comparison. They gossip, they mock, they measure their worth by who they think they're better than. They find comfort in tearing others down because it distracts them from their own lack of progress. But when you're focused on growth, you don't have time to judge anyone. The high-value man doesn't criticize. He observes. He studies people's flaws not to mock them, but to learn from them. He's too busy improving himself to envy someone else's journey. You can always tell where a man is in life by how he talks about others. Weak men talk about people. Strong men talk about ideas. Disciplined men talk about goals. Criticism is a reflection of insecurity, and when you constantly criticize, you're only exposing your own lack of direction. So instead of asking, what's wrong with them? Start asking, what's missing in me that makes me care so much? And that's why the next sign is critical. The kind of people you surround yourself with will determine whether you rise or stay stuck exactly where you are. 6. You surround yourself with fools. Show me your circle and I'll show you your future. You can't outgrow an environment that keeps you small. Low-value men hang around people who think small, act lazy, and make excuses. They stay in circles where no one challenges them because being comfortable feels safer than being called out. But here's what happens. You become like the people you spend the most time with. If your friends complain, you'll start complaining. If they waste time, you'll waste time. If they have no goals, you'll lose yours too. That's why so many men never grow. They're loyal to people who are holding them back. They confuse friendship with familiarity. They mistake comfort for loyalty. The high-value man chooses his circle with precision. He surrounds himself with men who are stronger, wiser, more disciplined than him. Men who don't flatter him. They sharpen him. He knows that iron sharpens iron, not comfort. So look around. Are the people around you making you better or making you slower? Are they pushing you forward or pulling you down? You can't rise with people who have no interest in climbing. And that's exactly why the final sign is the most dangerous of all. 7. You're addicted to comfort. This is where most men lose everything they've worked for. They stop growing the moment life gets easy. They get a stable job, a small win, some attention, and they stop pushing. Low-value men are addicted to comfort. They want to feel good, not grow. They avoid challenges, pressure, and anything that reminds them they're still behind. But comfort kills ambition quietly. You don't even notice it happening until one day you realize years have passed and you haven't moved an inch. High-value men are different. They seek discomfort. They chase growth. They understand that pain isn't punishment. It's the process that separates the average from the elite. If you only work when it's easy, you'll never reach the level that demands sacrifice. Every man wants success. Few are willing to bleed for it. Ask yourself, when was the last time you truly did something that scared you? When was the last time you pushed beyond your limit? If you can't remember, that's your answer. The man who chooses comfort today will live with regret tomorrow. How to reclaim your value. Listen, brother, every man has low-value habits. But what separates men who rise from those who rot is awareness. You can't fix what you don't face. So if any of these signs hit you hard, good. That means your self-awareness is waking up. Becoming a high-value man isn't about being perfect. It's about being intentional. It's about cutting the habits that weaken you and rebuilding the discipline that makes you untouchable. Every no you say to weakness builds a stronger version of you. Every time you choose growth over comfort, you rise. Every time you stay silent instead of complaining, you gain power. Start small. Build structure. Protect your focus. Respect your time. Keep your word, especially to yourself. At the end of the day, your value isn't defined by money, women, or status. It's defined by how much control you have over yourself. So from today, stop blaming, stop running, stop waiting. You've got one life, brother. Make sure when it's over, you can look back and say, I didn't waste it being average. The new place wasn't better. It was simpler. The walls were a quiet white instead of a tired beige. The window was larger, facing an alley that caught the morning in a long silver blade. He brought little with him: a mattress, 2 chairs that didn't match, a battered kettle, a pull-up bar, and the notebook. The rest he sold or gave away and didn't miss. He told himself the same sentence every time he packed a box. I'm not escaping anything. I'm reducing the number of places to hide. On the first evening in the new space, he made tea and sat on the floor with his back to the wall. The apartment sounded like a conch shell. The soft roar of the building breathing, a distant elevator sighing, footsteps above like rain. He opened the notebook and wrote a date. Then he wrote a rule: no negotiation after decisions. He understood why he'd failed so often. He held debates with himself at the edge of every promise. From now on, decisions were signed contracts, not suggestions. If he chose, he showed up. The first test came on a Tuesday. At 5:10 a.m., the alarm rang. His brain lunged for a bargain. 30 more minutes will make you sharper later, and he recognized the shape of it: reasonable, clever, soft with concern. He sat up anyway. The floor was cold enough to make the bones in his feet twinge. He stood in that mild discomfort, let it finish speaking, and stepped over it. In the mirror, he looked like a man halfway between 2 selves. He didn't break the stare. We're going, he told the reflection, and the reflection went. Outside, the city was a sleeping animal with one eye open. He ran until the air grew ragged in his throat and the sky found its color. Back home, he did push-ups in tight sets, the kind that made his arms fizzle. He ended with a long plain breakfast: eggs, oats, black coffee, and a page of reading. The book didn't know him. It didn't flatter him or care. It made demands. He liked that in things now. At work, the changes looked small from the outside. He spoke less, listened more, and turned in drafts that were boring in the best way: clear, on time, and complete. He asked for the ugly feedback before anyone offered the polite version. When a colleague complained about the client, Armin didn't nod along as he would have before. He said, "What's the one part we can control this week?" The colleague blinked, then answered. By Friday, they had solved it. The city was still the city, loud, impatient, full of buffets for an undisciplined mind. The billboards blinked promises. The sidewalks sold shortcuts. Armand walked past them like an old man walking past a carnival, fond, unpersuaded. The truth he was learning tasted almost bitter. There are no hacks for becoming someone you respect. Only a daily tax, paid in the currency of attention and effort. On a gray Wednesday, he met Rana. He'd ducked into a small bookstore to escape a sudden spill of rain. The place smelled like paper in the past. A woman stood on a little ladder, reshelving paperbacks with a practiced grace that made the ladder unnecessary. She had the look of someone who had kept many small promises to herself for a very long time. When she climbed down, the room seemed taller. "Can I help you find something?" she asked. "Something that doesn't congratulate me for reading it," he said, and surprised himself with the honesty. She smiled in a way that declined the joke. "Try this." She handed him a thin book with a thick spine, the sort that had survived the fad winds. "It's like a friend who won't let you get away with anything. I need those," he said. "We all do," she answered, and returned to her ladder. They became familiar in the way that good conversations do, both frequent and unhurried. He learned that Rana ran the store with her father, who preferred the company of index cards and fountain pens. Armand didn't tell her about the old version of himself. He told her about the new rules instead, not as achievements, but as requests. She listened without praise. He began to understand the beginning of respect is a certain distance. 2 people standing upright, not leaning on each other to remain standing. In the gym, he met men who measured progress in quiet inches. There was a former wrestler who never spoke about the podiums he'd seen. There was a chef who lifted like every rep salted his future. One morning, Armand misloaded a bar and the wrestler's eyebrows lifted. "Are you sure?" And Armand corrected the plates without explanation. He learned the virtue of gyms like this. If you showed up and worked, you belonged. If you talked instead, you left the belonging on the floor. The first real setback arrived the way setbacks often do. Through the door he'd left unlocked. He'd been awake for 3 months by his count. He had not missed a morning. He had not gone to the old bars or the new ones. He had tamed his phone into a gray, compliant rectangle. Then one weekend, A friend from a former life called with a voice full of nostalgia and persuasion. "Just come by for an hour," the friend said. "We'll catch up. It's been ages. You know how to control yourself now." The last sentence slipped past Armin's new defenses because it disguised itself as faith in him. An hour became 4. The music was good, and the conversation cheaper than the drinks. He wasn't drunk exactly. He was softened. He laughed in the old way, which felt like removing a weight and discovering it had been a spine. At home, the alarm rang early and he killed it gently. "You've earned a morning off," said the voice he hadn't heard in a while. He slept. By the time he rose, the day had the stubbornness of stale bread. His training felt like pushing through syrup. His work slid sideways. He found himself reaching for arguments in meetings. He almost enjoyed the heat of them, like a man who holds his hand near a candle to confirm it still burns. The old gravity was subtle but strong. By evening, he stood in the kitchen with his palms pressing the counter, hating himself with that special hatred reserved for minor betrayals that know your name. He could have thrown the whole week away. That was his old way. If the day failed, burn the calendar. He chose a smaller, harder path. He made a plain dinner, washed the dishes by hand, and wrote in the notebook, "You are not your best day. You are not your worst day. You are the average of your kept promises." He set the alarm an hour earlier and put the phone across the room, not as punishment, but as a reminder that systems should forgive human days. In the morning, his body complained like a union, but he moved through each station: water, breath, floor, street. When the sun finally showed, he felt like a man who had paid an overdue bill. A week later, he saw his old friend again and declined the invitation with a courtesy that wasn't apologetic. The friend shrugged. Some people think boundaries are insults. Armin no longer explained fences to cattle. Work grew larger. A difficult project landed in his lap, the kind that had a reputation for sinking careers because it asked many small favors and gave little glory. He said yes because glory is a poor metric for value. He mapped the project the way a hiker maps a mountain, not with fantasy, but with contour lines and altitudes. He broke it into mile markers, deadline stones planted in the calendar where he could stub his toes on them. He recruited 3 colleagues, the quiet, competent kind, and promised them credit in writing. Then he told his manager the only sentence that makes managers remember your name for the right reasons: "Hold me to what I'm about to promise." They delivered. Not beautifully, but firmly. The client's emails lost their thorns. The manager's eyebrows learned a more relaxed shape. Someone in senior leadership asked to meet Armin sometime and meant it. He noted the change, then folded his attention back into the work. He'd learned a clean trick. Momentum only needs daily food, not fireworks. On a slow Sunday, he walked into the bookstore and found Rana cataloging a new stack with a pencil behind her ear. She looked at him the way you look at a person who has returned from a journey without telling the story, searching for the new lines on his face. "How's the friend?" she asked, as if she had been present at the bar. "We're friendly," he said. "From a distance?" She nodded, approving the honesty without endorsing the man. "Good distances save good people," she said, then changed the subject with a kindness that left the air light. They began to have tea in the back room, where a window made a rectangle of light on a table scored with decades of pen marks. The conversation had a healthy awkwardness to it, the small stumbles of 2 people trying not to pretend. She told him about her father's habit of writing letters to books as if they were stubborn friends. Armin wanted to ask her to dinner and did not. He had learned the difference between wanting a thing and wanting to be worthy of the thing you want. The worthy test came from a stranger. Armin's gym had a bulletin board where people posted invitations. Running clubs, weekend hikes, odd job offers. One index card said, "Saturday, dawn stairwell marathon. Bring legs and humility." He laughed, then wrote the time in his notebook. The marathon was not a race. It was a ritual. A dozen people met at the base of an old stadium stairwell before the sun and moved up and down step flights until they were quiet enough to hear themselves. The leader was a woman with salt in her hair and clean, clear eyes. "No music," she said. "No numbers. We go until it hurts a little past safe. Then we stop and stretch and tell the truth. Then we eat pancakes." They climbed. Within 10 minutes, Armin's thighs were fires held in buckets. He found the rhythm, up, down, breath like rope, and tried not to think. When he could no longer avoid it, The thoughts arrived with their old briefcases. You don't need this. You've proved enough. You work hard already. He kept moving. He watched a man 10 years older than him take each step as if he were sewing something into the day. He decided to borrow that man's patience and pay him back later. After, they sat on the stadium steps and ate pancakes with too much syrup and exactly enough satisfaction. The leader asked, "What did you tell yourself when it got ugly?" Armin said, "I told myself to keep the promise and let the feeling catch up." She laughed like she'd heard the line before and was glad to hear it again. "That's a good way to carry a day," she said. "It's a better way to carry a life." He returned every Saturday. The stairwell became a chapel, the pancakes a communion. He noticed the same people coming back: a nurse with night shifts, a teacher with the gentlest swears, a carpenter whose hands looked like they'd won fights with wood. They were not trying to look like anything. They were showing up. He folded himself into that quiet parade, months collected behind him. He became the kind of person who attracts questions from people who aren't ready to like the answers. "How did you get so disciplined?" they asked, as if it were a secret he might sell them cheaply. He answered without flourish, "I keep tiny promises and I don't negotiate with my decisions." Some nodded, disappointed there wasn't a spice to sprinkle on their food. Then came the hardest season. His father, who had taught him tenderness and also how to avoid the mirror, suffered a small stroke that left his left hand clumsy and his temper short. Armin flew home and entered a house heavy with the sound of machines telling the truth about flesh. He slept in his old room where the ceiling still held the faint outlines of glow-in-the-dark stars. He made tea for his mother in the mornings and cleaned the kitchen after she told him not to. He sat with his father in the afternoon while the television shouted like an uncle. He didn't try to fix the anger. He tried to stay. In that small house, Armin saw his old patterns waiting for him like loyal dogs. It would be so easy to indulge them. You're stressed, you deserve comforts, and lose the edge he had earned. So he carved smaller disciplines out of a smaller day. He did the stairwell ritual in the stairwell of the hospital, up and down 3 floors, until a nurse smiled at the sight of him, and then pretended not to. He ate the same boring meals and called them medicine. He read to his father until the older man dozed, and then read to himself until the words held. One evening, after the house went soft with sleep, Armin went to the backyard and stood under a sky that had not changed its act since he was a boy. He remembered a summer when he promised he would grow into a man he admired and a winter when he forgot. He spoke quietly into the night. "I'm still working on it," he said, and the night didn't answer, which felt like trust. His father mended slowly. Control returned to the left hand. Humor returned to the eyes. On Armin's last night before flying back, the 2 men sat at the table with tea and an unspoken list of overdue conversations between them. His father pushed a small box across the table. "Your grandfather's watch," he said. "It doesn't keep perfect time." Neither did he, but he always knew when to show up. Armin turned the watch over in his hand. It was heavier than it looked. He understood what was being handed to him wasn't just metal. It was a sentence with a subject and a verb. A man shows up. He nodded because there are moments when speaking ruins the truth. Back in the city, Rana asked him how his father was, and Armin said, "Better. And I think I am too." She handed him a book without fanfare. Inside the front cover she'd written, "For kept promises and the ordinary courage they require." He read the line 3 times and didn't look up until he knew he could meet her eyes without making them carry the weight of his gratitude. He took on a volunteer class at a community center on Thursdays. Nothing grand. Just an hour with teenagers who were better at seeing through adults than those adults imagined. He taught them how to structure a week like a person who intends to win it. He told them the 2 lies achievers tell themselves. "I'll start when I feel like it, and I'll restart perfectly next Monday." And he told them the simple counters. Start now. Restart small. They rolled their eyes the way the young do when truth sounds unglamorous, and then some of them came back the next week and said they had made their beds. He praised them as if they'd crossed a desert, because sometimes a bed is a desert. He failed again, of course. He missed a morning. He snapped at a colleague. He scrolled past his bedtime and felt the old hollow in his lungs the next day. The difference was the size of the failure now. It had shrunk. He didn't build shrines to it or write biographies about it in his head. He folded it into the ledger and kept moving. He was no longer trying to be perfect. He was trying to be consistent, which is how perfection is accidentally approximated by mortals. He folded it into the ledger and kept moving. He was no longer trying to be perfect. He was trying to be consistent, which is how perfection is accidentally approximated by mortals. The promotion came without ceremony. His manager called him into a room with bad art and better news. The role would not make him rich. It would give him more responsibility and slightly less time. He almost said no. He was wary of new titles that make men forget their old vows. But then he remembered the staircase and the pancakes and decided that strain, properly held, is a good teacher. He said yes and promised himself not to outsource his identity to a job description. His value was not his role. His role was a vehicle, not a crown. On a clear evening that found him early, he walked to the bookstore with no intention beyond the pleasure of being near spines. Rana was reading behind the counter the way a lighthouse reads the sea. He asked if she wanted to walk. She looked at him for a long second, measuring the sentence against the months. Then she closed the book gently, as if not to startle anything in the air, and said, yes. They walked without urgency. He told her a story about the stairwell. She told him one about a customer who always bought the same book for different people, as if trying to give them the map he had once needed himself. They reached a bridge where the river held the city's lights like secrets. He wanted to say something large and chose something small. I'm trying to be someone I wouldn't rush, he said. That's a good project, she answered. It will take your whole life. That's fine, he said. I have one. They stood there until the wind found them and the night asked if they were serious. They were. Armin didn't realize the city had seasons until he started keeping pace with them. The air thinned, the light angled, the mornings grew sharper. He adjusted in small ways, longer warm-ups before runs, thicker socks, a slower first mile. The notebook filled with observations that would have sounded trivial to the Armin who used to only notice what shouted. He was learning that real change prefers whispers. Work, meanwhile, stopped cooperating with his plans. The new role came with a project whose outline looked tidy on paper and feral in the wild. A partner company had promised a piece of software that behaved like a polite guest in demos and like an animal cornered by fluorescent light in production. Clients grew curt. Internal emails accumulated the brittle tone of people who were running out of blame. Armin spent late afternoons in conference rooms that smelled like old coffee and new panic, translating technical failure into human next steps. I need a date, the client lead said over video one evening, face lit by a screen that had no right to be that close to bedtime. Not a feeling, not a probability curve. A date. Armin wanted to say the true thing. Complex systems laugh at calendars, but he also believed in the discipline of commitment. He looked at his team. The wrestler looked back with a face that said, "We'll lift it." And the quiet engineer drew a small rectangle on her notepad and wrote a number inside it. Armin read it and nodded. 3 weeks from today, he said. We'll ship something real, not perfect. Real, you can put hands on it. The call ended with a sound like a door closing in a wind. He didn't make speeches to his team. He made lists. They cut scope with the gentleness of surgeons and the ruthlessness of parents who love their kids too much to let them eat candy for dinner. They removed 3 charming features that had charmed exactly no one except the people who needed them to feel clever, and they built a spine. The quiet engineer ran stand-ups like a conductor. Armin kept the politics at bay with the only shield that works: transparent, frequent updates. Every night he sent a note that said what they did, what they were stuck on, and what tomorrow would mean. He did not decorate the truth. He did not dramatize it either. At home, he guarded his mornings like a monk guards an old bell. If a day started true, it could suffer more lies without collapsing. He moved through the ritual, water, breath, floor, street, with a seriousness that would have looked like austerity from the outside. Inside, it felt like oxygen. One morning after a run, he stopped by the bookstore. The bell over the door gave its small surprise sound. Rana was behind the counter, head bent over a ledger. She looked up, and her face held something he hadn't seen before, a fatigue so honest it didn't even try to hide. What happened? He asked softly. My father, she said. Nothing dramatic. Everything dramatic. She closed the ledger. He's fine, and by fine I mean he's not. His hands are getting slower. He can't write the way he wants to. He says the pen's got heavier, but I know it's the wrists. I'm sorry, Armin said. And he meant it in the long way. the way that stretches out to include all the small moments grief accumulates. "I am too," she said, "but we will treat it like weather, dress for it and keep walking." She smiled, a brief crooked thing that looked like it had been rescued from a drawer. "How are you?" He told her about the project and the date and the way the team had decided to choose reality over romance. She listened with the half-smile she saved for competence. When he was done, she slid a card across the counter. It was a membership form for a tiny neighborhood fund she and a few shopkeepers kept. A thing too modest to be called a foundation, too structured to be called a hat passed around. "We help with rent if someone good falls behind," she said. "We cover groceries when shifts get cut. We buy textbooks. Sometimes we just pay a light bill and call it a miracle. It's not charity. It's a way of saying, we live here together." He filled it out on the counter, wrote the monthly number he knew he'd feel and still be able to keep, and slid the card back. She didn't thank him. She didn't insult it with gratitude. She said, "Welcome," like someone who had given him a key. The stairwell marathon evolved as the weather did. They wore beanies and thin gloves, and the ritual gained an extra rule. You don't joke during the first 10 minutes because breathing is sacred and words aren't. The leader with salt in her hair taught them a stretch for bones that had opinions and a trick for shoes that squeaked like new hires. Armin found himself taking newcomers under his quiet wing, showing them where to put their hands when their lungs turned into unfamiliar countries. He didn't say much. He set a pace anyone could hate, but everyone could survive. 2 weeks into the 3-week sprint, the software learned a new trick. It failed differently every day. Armin stopped getting angry about it. Anger is a show you put on to feel like you're doing something. He had no time for theater. The team turned their chairs toward one another and kept a shared document that was less a list and more a living argument with reality. They wrote down every failure like a witness statement and attached the fix, even if the fix was only 50% fixed. The night before the delivery, Armin opened his notebook and wrote 2 sentences in big letters. "We promise the truth. We will deliver the truth and make it work tomorrow." He slept cleanly. They shipped. The client didn't applaud. That was a relief. Applause is dangerous. It makes men forget the work left to do. But the client's angry emails stopped, and that's its own kind of ovation. Armin took the team to a diner with coffee that tasted like it would never die, and pancakes that owed taxes. He raised his mug and said, "To boring excellence." They laughed because they knew what he meant. Exciting failure is everywhere. Boring excellence is rare. On the way home, he walked past a window where a television screamed about people who had conquered life through hacks that took 6 minutes a day. He looked at his reflection in the glass, older this year, calmer, the edges not softer so much as truer, and felt nothing but relief that he had stopped believing in magic spells. The following Thursday at the community center, Armin walked into a room with 20 teenagers who were allergic to pretense. He started with the same question he always did. "What promise did you keep this week that no one knows about?" A girl with a red scarf raised her hand and said she had told herself she would not clap back at a teacher who had deserved it. A boy in a jacket that had known rain said he made his bed 5 days in a row, and his mother had not noticed, and that was okay. Armin wrote both on the board like they were laws. After class, a quiet kid named Mika lingered. He had eyes that collected rooms and filed them. "What if your house is loud?" Mika asked. "Like all the time. If I wake up early, people ask me why I'm acting better than them. If I read, they talk loud on purpose. I want to do it anyway. I just don't want to hate them for making it harder." Armin recognized the question as a grown one wearing a younger coat. "You build a room inside your day," he said. "It doesn't need walls. It needs rules. 10 minutes when you wake up. Headphones, a page, push-ups, cold water. No announcements. You do it whether they clap or complain. You let them be loud. You let your decision be louder." Mika nodded with a seriousness that made Armin feel both honored and responsible. "And if I mess up?" "You'll mess up," Armin said. "Start again that afternoon. Don't wait for Monday. Perfection is a country with no citizens." When the weather turned cruel, the bookstore's heat broke like a tired promise. Rana called a repairman who had grown old on ladders, and he shook his head at pipes that had been asked to do too much for too long. The estimate was not kind. The fund could help a little, but this was a large repair posing as a small one. "Close for a week," Armin said. "Do it right. "We cannot afford that," she said, and did the math out loud. "Rent, payroll, surprise taxes. And also," she added, "we cannot afford not to." She closed for a week. Armin helped carry boxes to the back and learned that books are heavier than they look, like convictions. He left his card at the hardware store and told them to charge anything with the bookstore's name on it to him for the next 7 days. He did it without the performance of generosity. He simply moved the weight from a shelf that was bowing to a shelf that could stand it for now. During the closure, he discovered something about Rana he hadn't yet seen fully. She was not just careful, she was brave. She made a list of bad inventory decisions she and her father had made out of sentiment and promised to not make them again. She called 3 schools and offered them a discount if they ordered through her instead of a faceless site. She wrote a letter to the neighborhood about why the store mattered and didn't apologize for saying so. On reopening day, the bell over the door worked again. The heat came alive with a small cough and then did its job. Customers wandered in with the gladness of people walking into a place that doesn't try to sell them an identity, only some companions for their hour. A retired man bought a book about trees and said he was late to them. A woman bought a cookbook and joked that she hoped it came with time. A kid used coins and shy eyes to buy a fantasy novel that was too long and exactly right. After the lunch crowd, Rana and Armand sat in the back room. Her father shuffled in with 2 mugs and the old stubborn grace of men who have made peace with their slower pace. "You took care of my daughter's store," he said to Armin without the cushion of small talk. "Thank you. I helped," Armin said. "She took care of it." "That is true," the older man said, and left the room the way he had arrived, suddenly and on purpose. Rana looked at Armin. "You didn't make a show of it," she said. "Shows are for theaters," he said. "I like bookstores." She laughed in that unguarded way again, and he felt something in his chest acknowledge both its fragility and its strength. At work, a different kind of test approached. A senior director known for his glossy slides and disappearing acts asked Armin to massage a status report for the executive team. The request was not vulgar, just dishonest in that polite corporate way that expects men to smooth corners until the square you promised becomes a circle you can roll away from. Armin read the email twice. He felt the old instinct to compromise with small lies tug at him, the logic that says it's just numbers on a slide. The truth will catch up later. He drafted a response he might have written a year ago, something diplomatic and slippery. He erased it. He wrote, "I'll present accurate status and clear plan. If that's a problem, I understand if you'd like someone else to present." He copied his manager. He hit send and went for a walk before the adrenaline could convince him he had just ended his career over a spreadsheet. By the time he returned, his manager had replied to both of them. "Accuracy is the brand. Armin presents." The director's calendar invite arrived 3 minutes later with a note that said simply, "Understood." The presentation was not exciting. It was calm. Armin told the truth plainly and owned the parts that were theirs to own. Executives asked questions he had prepared for, and 2 he hadn't. He said, "I don't know yet," twice, and followed both with, "Here's how I'll find out." When the meeting ended, people left without ceremony, which is how you know a thing has been done correctly. That night, he met the stairwell group under a sky that looked hammered. They climbed until their legs made the language of protest, and then they kept climbing because that's how the choir sings. At the top, the leader said, "Next month, a few of us will run the Coastal Ultra. It's not about speed. It's about whether you can stay with yourself for a long time. Anyone interested?" Armand raised his hand. Training for the Ultra did not require brilliance. It required boredom. Long, slow runs that turned the city into a loop of familiar corners and allowed his brain to get quiet enough to tell the truth, which is, he discovered, what brains want when they are not being fed sugar and panic. He adjusted his work and sleep like a carpenter shaves a door until it swings cleanly. He ate like a person who intended to still be himself at mile 30. One afternoon, he ran past the community center and saw Mika sitting on the steps reading the same book as last week, but this time with a pen. Armin stopped. "You're annotating," he said. Mika smirked. "I'm arguing. The author thinks discipline is about force. I think it's about friendship. I'm writing him letters in the margins." Armin laughed. "You remind me of someone. Your girlfriend?" Mika teased and Armin coughed on air. The boy grinned. "You talk about someone when you don't mean to." Armin shook his head, still smiling. Maybe I do, he said, and ran on, surprised at the ease with which the truth had found his mouth. 2 weeks before the ultra, something broke, not in his body, but close. He was crossing a street at dusk when a car turned without confidence. Armin stepped back to avoid becoming an apology. His foot landed half on curb, half on air. His ankle rolled in a way ankles have rolled since there were ankles. He sat on the curb and breathed through the clean pain. The doctor was not dramatic. "A grade 1 sprain," she said. "You've got 7 to 10 days of deciding how much you respect the future. Ice it, compress it, elevate it. Don't be a hero. Heroes limp for months." He wanted to argue that this race was different, that he had earned it with early mornings and stairs and dull food. He swallowed the argument. Earning does not change physics. He did as told. He iced, compressed, elevated. He took a week off from running and did upper body work that made him laugh at himself in the mirror. He walked everywhere he absolutely didn't need to drive and declined to be proud of it. On the morning of the ultra, he woke with an ankle that felt like a truce. The start line was at a coast that pretended to be calm. The leader of the stairwell group hugged everyone the way generals probably wish they could. "Remember," she said, "the goal is not to win. The goal is to arrive at the finish line still willing to speak kindly to yourself." He ran conservatively. The first miles tasted like patience. He watched the show-offs go out hot and wished them well. At mile 18, the ankle murmured a warning. At mile 22, it spoke louder. He listened. He walked for a mile, then jogged for 2, then walked again. He ate the strange gels that taste like serious fruit, and chatted with a volunteer who had been giving strangers water since a decade before Armin had learned to stop lying to himself. At mile 29, he saw a boy on the sideline holding a sign he clearly made 5 minutes ago. "Keep the promise." It looked like Mika's handwriting. Armin laughed out loud, and the laughter shook something loose. Anger at the sprain, at the car, at the story in his head that victory must look like a movie. He ran the last mile like a man balancing 2 truths. He was not at his best. He was doing his best. He crossed the line. No fireworks, no announcer mangling his name. Just a small beep and a volunteer saying, "Well done," as if she meant it exactly. He sat on the grass and texted 2 people. The first was Rana, finished. It wasn't pretty. It was honest. The second was his father. "Your watch made it 29 miles and a sermon." His father replied with the kind of emoji that men his age use to mean a story they don't have the energy to type. That night, he slept the sleep of someone who had kept a loud promise in a quiet way. Days fell back into their beat. He met Rana for tea and didn't try to make a moment of it. Moments don't like being told when to arrive. They prefer to ambush you when your hands are busy with ordinary tasks. She told him her father had learned to write again by holding the pen differently. "He says change is humbling," she said. "I told him humility looks good on him." Armin told her about the kid with the sign, and she smiled as if she had expected the world to start sending him his own words back. He almost reached for her hand and decided not to. Not yet. He was not delaying out of fear. He was delaying out of respect for the thing he wanted to be strong. At work, another promotion flirted with him through rumors and rearranged org charts. He decided not to lean toward it. Wanting a thing too hard often makes you reach with the wrong hand. He kept shipping boring excellence. He let his manager worry about titles. He worried about the next kept promise. On a rainy Tuesday, he walked into the bookstore and found a sign on the counter. "Story night. Bring 1 true story you've earned." Rana looked nervous in a way that made Armin proud on her behalf. "You're hosting?" he asked. "With my father," she said. "He will read a letter to a fountain pen." "That's very him," Armin said. "And you?" she asked. "Will you tell something?" He thought about the kinds of stories he used to tell, grand, polished, designed to harvest admiration, and felt a tiredness toward them. "I'll read a page from my notebook," he said. "The page from the night I messed up and didn't throw the week away." "Good," she said. People trust broken honesty more than unbroken myth. Story night was a collection of the city's quiet braveries. A nurse told a story about staying with a patient's widow after her shift. A teenager read a poem about the sound of his apartment when hope visits. A man with hands like rope confessed he had stopped drinking on a Wednesday and didn't tell anyone for 2 months because he wanted to be sure he meant it. Rana's father read a letter that made half the room wipe their faces and the other half pretend they weren't. Armin stood up last. He read the page like a person who had already shared it with himself 100 times. He did not make himself the hero. He made the decision the hero. When he finished, the room was quiet in the way rooms get when something lands without needing applause to prove it landed. After, as people drifted out into air that had decided to be kind, Rana stood next to him at the door. "You told it without rescue," she said. "I'm trying to stop rescuing myself," he said. She looked at him for a long, ordinary second and then took his hand. It wasn't dramatic. It was correct. They stood like that, two people who had been building separate, sturdy rooms inside themselves, and opened a door between them. Later, walking home, Armin realized something that should have been obvious, and yet felt like fresh rain. The life he wanted was not hiding behind one big moment. It was made of rooms, morning rooms, work rooms, stairwell rooms, back room with tea rooms, kept clean by kept promises. Love, too, was a room like that. You didn't earn it with a grand gesture. You earned the right to walk into it without tracking mud. He reached his apartment and set the watch on the windowsill. The city breathed the way it always had, impatient and generous. He brushed his teeth, set his alarm, and wrote one line before bed. Tomorrow is not a new life. It is the next kept promise. He slept, knowing the morning would ask him the same question it always did. And he would answer the way a man does when he finally understands where value comes from. Not with a speech, but by getting up.